I'm Amy Ng, curator at the Frick Collection in New York, and welcome to another episode of Cocktails with a Curator. The work of art that is the subject of this week's episode is George Romney's Lady Hamilton as Nature. And the cocktail to pair with it is a Limoncello Spritz. And the reason I chose limoncello as the base of this cocktail is because limoncello is it's a digestivo it's a liqueur digestivo that is typically served after meals. So traditionalists would never mix it with anything else to make a cocktail, would only have it straight. And limoncello is made from lemons, typically lemons that are grown in southern Italy, like Sorrento lemons. And this is in part an homage to Lady Hamilton, who spent an important part, a chapter of her life, living in Naples and a little bit in Sicily. And so the limoncello here is in praise of this moment in her life. The Limoncello Spritz, of course, is just limoncello, an ounce, some sparkling lemonade, and topped with Prosecco garnished with mint. Absolutely refreshing. Cheers. George Romney was a very popular, fashionable portraitist in 18th century Britain. He was a peer of, among the ranks of people like Sir Joshua Reynolds and Thomas Gainsborough. If he's not as famous as those two are now, it may a little bit have to do with the fact that he did not have as close of a relationship with the Royal Academy of Arts in London, which was sort of the official group of the British school in the 18th century and onwards. Reynolds was the founding director in 1768 of the Royal Academy. Gainsborough was a founding member. It was a way to sort of disseminate their own fame, their connections, their network. Romney did show at exhibitions organized by the Royal Academy, but he was never part of the Academy. But he was popular. People went to him for society portraits. And what I was just showing you was a self-portrait made later in his life in the 1790s. This one, this unfinished portrait of Romney made a little bit earlier, captures a little bit more of what I see as the great value of Romney. Not only the ability to capture psychological state, here the sort of brooding artist, arms crossed, but also, especially because of this unfinished state, one gets to see the vibrancy of his brush strokes, which in a really finished society portrait, sometimes you don't get to see. Here you really get the sense of how energetic he is in his brushwork, especially in the sketching, unfinished sketching of his lower body. This is a portrait in the National Portrait Gallery in London. Frick and many collectors in America in the early 20th century were also really into Romney, as they were into the paintings by Reynolds and Gainsborough. And Frick actually collected 5 paintings by Romney during his lifetime. A couple of busts like this, Miss Mary Finch Hatton on the left and Miss Harford on the right, and a couple of very large full-length portraits. Henrietta, the Countess of Warwick, and her children on the left, and Charlotte, Lady Milnes, on the right. But by far, the portrait of Emma, Lady Hamilton as Nature was the most popular, the most sensational, the most coveted, and I think it had a special place in Henry Clay Frick's heart. It certainly did in his home. This is the painting that he chose to hang in his bedroom on the second floor of the Frick collection. So it sort of lived with him in his private quarters. One cannot really talk about the career of George Romney without talking about Emma, Lady Hamilton. This was Romney's muse. When he met her, he became infatuated with her appearance. He painted dozens and dozens of paintings of her in various guises, head studies, portraits with various kinds of expressions and gestures and attitudes, different outfits, playing different characters, some full-length things. Here's her as Circe, a spinstress, a lady reading a paper. I'm just giving you a selection of the variations with which he showed and used Emma in his paintings. But the very first of these, the one that started it all, the very beginning of those dozens and dozens of paintings of Emma, was this one, the Frick picture of Emma, Lady Hamilton, as nature. But who is this woman? Well, she wasn't born Emma Lady Hamilton. This is an identity that she took on later on with the evolution of her life. She was born to a blacksmith, and she was called Amy Lyon. Her father passed away early on. She was in pretty a state of quite destitute poverty, to the point that she was working as a maid, cleaning wealthy people's homes as a child. At least by the age of 12, she was working as a maid. By the time she's a teenager in her mid-teens, she's doing other things, trying to help support her mother and her grandmother. She works as a hostess at parties and various other things. She gets into a little bit of trouble. She becomes pregnant with the baby of an aristocratic man who wants nothing to do with her. And at the same time, she meets this man, Sir Charles Greville. He agrees to help her. He agrees to take her in. He agrees to have even a relationship with her on a couple of conditions. One, that she gives up this baby. So she has the baby and she immediately has to give it to somebody else to raise. He will help support the baby, but he does not want the baby in their life. And the other thing that he requires is that she changes her name. Apparently, Amy was perhaps not sophisticated enough for him. She becomes Emma Hart. And they live in this arrangement. She is his mistress. It's a big improvement, let's say, from what she had been doing before. She's 17 years old at this time. It's Sir Charles who brings Emma over to the studio of George Romney. Charles knows that Romney's looking for a new muse, and he commissions this painting of Emma from Romney, not entirely innocently. Of course, he wants the painting and it stays with him for some time. He, like Romney, is kind of interested in a kind of commercial venture. Emma as the star or the muse of a series of works that would be sold both as paintings and later on more widely disseminated at a lower cost for a less wealthy clientele as prints. And in fact, a couple of years after Romney paints the Frick painting, the very first of Emma's paintings, that's 1782, a couple of years later, he issues with the mezzotint engraver John Raphael Smith a mezzotint of the painting to disseminate a little bit more widely to people who can't afford paintings but want art like this. Just to note, these are not portraits of Emma. It's not really about her and her identity. For example, on this print, which is circulated, which is bought, you have the name of the printmaker, Smith, and you have the name of the artist, Romney, but you do not have the name of the sitter. This is not a dissemination of her as an identity. In fact, this print is circulated with a new title and a poem, so that the painting is, or the image is much more about a subject. This is called Nature. I think you can see that below the sort of fictive frame. This is the way that the Frick picture has come to be called Lady Hamilton as nature because of this print. I won't read the lines of the poems, just to say that it sort of is a celebration of her various features, about her youth, the sweetness of her blushing lips, the wetness of her eyes, the sort of heaving chest and wild breath that she has, sort of this vaguely erotic language, which at the same time is sort of masked and legitimized by this adorable and very innocent looking puppy. And so I think this detail sort of encapsulates that collision of a very low cut exposure of her chest and breasts, but just where the décolletage ends, the puppy's head begins. So a mixture of things in this painting, the sense of innocence, but also the sort of hints of eroticism as well. I just want to show you this detail of this flowing hair, this wild brown, fabulous loose hair of Emma in this painting. And this is the kind of detail which gives you the sense, when I showed you that unfinished self-portrait of Romney, gives you a sense of the vibrant brush stroke, just really wild strokes of paint that make her hair seem to come alive, and make the surface of this canvas really come alive. One has to see this version or representation of Emma as nature in comparison to what society portraits looked like at the time, and what Romney and Reynolds and Gainsborough were painting of wealthy women who wanted to be immortalized in portraiture. They were typically like this. The fashion was powdered white wigs, the whitest, most opaque makeup in the face, a blotch of red blush, this really artificial, really tied up, really worked elegance. And I'm showing you an extreme version of this. Of course, this is Joshua Reynolds' painting of the Sisters Waldegrave, one of my favorite paintings of the 18th century, in the National Gallery in Scotland. But of course, this is what the other portraits by Romney in the Frick's collection are aspiring to, this sort of elegant society portrait of these wealthy British women in their grayed wigs, powdered, the face white, everything really kind of tuned in a conservative way, let's say. Imagine, in comparison, sort of the freedom, the fantasy of youth, even the fantasy of female availability that Emma's painting of her as nature presents. It's a totally different kind of sense of the woman. Unfortunately for Emma, she has associated herself with a man who has a title and has some money to get along, but he really doesn't have enough money to secure his future, and certainly not hers. And there comes a point a few years after Romney has first met her and she has become his great muse, and many paintings are made of her. Charles realizes that he has to get rid of Emma. And the reason is he has to marry a wealthy woman in order to secure his own legacy and his own life and lifestyle. So he sends Emma to Naples, in a way, in the guise of going on a sort of trip. Maybe he'll come along, and he sends her to meet his uncle, a much older man, Sir William Hamilton. Sir William Hamilton is the British ambassador to the Kingdom of Naples. He's an important, a well-respected person. He's recently widowed. He's about 40 years older than Emma. And in this portrait of him by Reynolds, he seems surrounded by Greek vases, by pages in an illustrated book. He's a great art collector. In fact, a portion of his collection of antiquities of Greek vases ended up in the British Museum. And he had a great collection of paintings as well, and some kind of astounding paintings. Unfortunately, he sold them. He sold off his collection by the end of his life. But among his paintings collection were things like, unexpected things like Velázquez's great portrait of Juan de Pareja, now at the Metropolitan Museum, one of the superstars of portraiture of 17th century painting. Also in the background of the portrait of William Hamilton is a smoking volcano. He was also a volcanologist, very, very interested in volcanoes, Vesuvius, Etna, and he wrote a number of works about this, about the phenomenon of volcanoes. And in fact, Susan Sontag, who wrote a historical novel about Emma Hamilton and William Hamilton and this sort of very dramatic affair of her life and his life. The title of Susan Sontag's book is The Volcano Lover. And this is, obviously part of their life down in Naples, down in the south of Italy. She eventually realizes that she's been sent to Naples to become his mistress. Luckily, in fact, they end up getting married. In 1791, she marries William Hamilton to become Lady Hamilton. So she has aspired to a title and she has achieved it. She becomes very popular in Naples. She, in the same way that she had transformed herself for Romney in his paintings, she has developed this sort of theatrical performance that she puts on at various parties at the court called the Attitudes. And she would, play these sort of tableaus of herself to great acclaim. And she became very close with Queen Maria Carolina, the sister of Marie Antoinette, who was there as the Queen of Naples and Sicily. It's also here in Naples that she meets Horatio Nelson. He is a military hero. He will have great success battling Napoleon, the Battle of the Nile in 1798. These two fall in love. He's already married, but she is too. And they fall in love. They begin an affair, very notorious affair, very scandalous affair. People don't like it because he is such a celebrated military figure and she is who she is. The more bizarre thing is that her husband, William Hamilton, it's not that he's part of their affair. He sort of condones it and he maintains a very strong friendship with Horatio Nelson. In fact, the three of them become sort of their motto together is 3 in 1. And so it's an unusual arrangement that people don't really understand. It's very scandalous. But it works for them. They eventually, all three, escape Naples with the coming of the French army, first to Palermo and then returning to England. Back in England, it's 1802. William Hamilton has to sell his collection for various reasons, debts, but probably also personal reasons. And in addition to selling great works like Velázquez's portrait of Juan de Pareja, he sells off this portrait of his wife, the very first of Romney's paintings of her. And what that must have felt like for her, for him, to sell off that painting while both are still alive. It's something to think about. In the same year, Emma gives birth to a daughter with Horatio Nelson, named Horatia. In the following year, 1803, her husband dies. Just a few years later, Lord Nelson dies, unfortunately, in his victorious battle at Trafalgar. He is mortally wounded. It doesn't end well for Emma. Despite the fact that she inherits something from both of these men, she really struggles. And she is deep in debt. And 10 years later, she has been sort of sentenced to some imprisonment for not being able to pay her debts. And in 1815, she dies destitute at the age of 49. There is a lot of sadness behind that fantasy of youth and freedom of her portrait. Her great strength, though, was the ability to transform herself. Not just in Romney's paintings of her, not just in these theatrical attitudes that made her so popular in Naples, but really in her life, from the blacksmith's daughter, Amy Lyon, to Emma Hart, the mistress of Charles Greville, to Lady Hamilton, the darling of the royal court in Naples. She looks out from her painting at the age of 17 and to me, it gives me a sense of the great strength of a young person who has already by this point been through so much. One would say maybe that life had given her lemons, and with those lemons, she made lemonade. It's a terrible joke, but it's a really good way for me to segue to cheers. Hope you are enjoying your limoncello spritz. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.